We're talking about a concept called Das Bailim, and we began the following discussion. In a case of Chatos and Hashamos, we require tshuva because the entire essence of these two categories is kapara, and kapara requires tshuva. Tshuva requires vidu. Now, as far as Ola is concerned, it's a little bit more complicated because it really depends on whether he violated a mitzvah saseh. But let's assume he didn't fulfill a mitzvah saseh in that case. So then Ola is mechaper on esim, on a mitzvah saseh, but he has to do tshuva. Okay. Now he has a concept of emuna b'tshuva. You have to have a certain faith. I mean, if the whole essence of the korban and its impact is kapar, you have to believe that the korban has within it inherently the power to generate a kapar. Aval hamavit meva'et milashon bi'ud, to kick. Bahem, meaning he's very cynical. He doesn't believe that the korban has any power to it. Is ein mechaper. Then there's no kapar. So in addition to tshuva or vidui, it's not enough that he goes through the mechanical external actions and recitations of vidui for the korban to be activated and successfully achieve kapar. He needs also to believe in the kapar power that's inherent in the korban. Ketzad, hoyem mevayit behevi chatoso achom bu omer b'kashibulibo ein elu mechaper. So he's thinking in his mind that this korban is not going to be mechaper for him, even though he brought the korban, but it's a chatos or a nosh. Is then afal pi shekirvu kimitzvos, and even if the kohanim, the holy kohanim, did all the avodah, everything was done, kil chasa kedasu kedin, lo niskaper. Now the question is, when we say lo niskaper, does that mean that possibility number A, the chatos and the yoshim is suspended in midair, and we're waiting for him to straighten it out in his mind? Or do we say no? Since at the moment of the hakrava, which is the critical moment, he did not believe in the kapar power of the korban, therefore later on, if he finally gets it straight, he's going to have to replace it with another korban, because he invalidates the korban b'shaito, and it's not suspended, waiting, so to speak, for him to do tshuva. And the halacha is afal pi shekirva kimitzvasan lo niskapelo, but more than that, lo niskapelo means that this korban is mufta, completely excluded from generating kapara. Ucheyasa b'tshuva b'biyotaso tzarich lahavi chataso b'hashama. He's going to have to replace the original chatos, the original asham, and he was not yotzi his mitzvah until he replaces the chatos of the asham. So the be'ita, with an ayin, the be'ita of the power of the korban to be mechaper invalidates the korban as far as he's concerned. Hachronim kosvu, he has got a sefer which I'm not familiar with. Shegam hakorban ola el she'enim aratz al averas esei bofen zeh. The same lumdus, the same halachic principles will apply in the case of korban ola, and in the case where he's mavid b'kaparasa, then if he wants to achieve kapar, he's going to have to bring a second replacement korban ola. Then he says that kol adam yochel hakish korban kidei she's kaper bo chavero, that Reuven can bring a korban for the sake of Shimon achieving kapara. And now the obvious question is, how does that operate? Because Shimon didn't do tshuva. He's not kachron shof zeh miskaper ochlos abasa kevin shabayim shel korban kaparos. Who's going to eat the korban, the basar korban? Let's assume that the bailim of the korban, for whom which the korban was brought. So Reuven is bringing, let's say it the other way. Shimon is bringing a korban for Reuven. Reuven happens to be a kohen. Reuven will eat the korban. He is considered the Bailam. What makes him the Bailam? It's not the signer of the check, meaning even though it was Shimon who actually signed the check when he purchased the animal, he's not the Bailam of the korban. Bailus of the korban depends on kapara, and I'm going to assume that Reuven was very excited about the fact that Shimon offered and volunteered to bring a korban on his behalf. But I'm going to also assume that Reuven actually recited vidun. He did tshuva. Otherwise, it's impossible to understand why the kapara would accrue to Reuven if he didn't do tshuva. Kapara is only meaningful with tshuva. But let's assume he did do tshuva. And the korban is now olula. He, Reuven, is the Bailam. He, Reuven, therefore, has the rights to the basar korban. Now, I'm not going to mention the korban shlamim here, which would allow me to say that Reuven is not even a Kohen, because in the case of korban shlamim, we're not dealing with the power of kapara. But let's talk about a concept called ritzui hakorban. And even in a korban shlamim, where there's no essential kapara to the korban, but there is a ritzui, and the ritzui will determine who's the bala korban and who eats the basar. If Shimon brings a korban shlamim on behalf of Reuven, the ritzui now is Reuven's ritzui, and therefore Reuven will eat the basar korban and not Shimon, even if Reuven's not a Kohen. Now we talk about a meshumad. Meshumad, again, the word meshumad took on colloquially different meanings over the course of time, but the original meaning of the word meshumad in Shas is someone who worships an idol. Mechal Shabbos b'Faresya also has a din of meshumad, meaning if he violates the Shabbos publicly, he's not a meshumad technically, but he has the same halachic status as a meshumad. And therefore, we're not going to be makabel his korban. He wants to bring a korban, we cannot accept it until he does tshuva. Once he says, I'm willing to desist, I will no longer drive my car publicly on Shabbos, then we can accept him his korban. Person regrets and he has remorse over the fact that he worshipped an idol, we can accept his korban. But as long as he's still an active, he waves the flag of the idol worshippers, he's got that black flag or whatever color it is, and he's still being Mechal Shabbos V'Hesya, we cannot accept his korban. Not Dachon, Shedin Za'omer Gam, Im Avar Avodah Zarah B'Meziv Pam Achas Bilvad. You would think that an idol worshiper means he gets the status of Meshubah because he's a multi-criminal, he's already established himself to be in the telem, we call it, in the trend of constantly worshiping idols. No, he worshipped an idol one time. He's a Meshubah. Or Chilel Shabbos b'Farhesya b'Zadon Pamachas. One desecration, a deliberate desecration in public of the Shabbos engenders the status of a meshumad. He's like a meshumad. He's a Mechal Shabbos V'Hesya. Now again, there's an issue about meshumad with regard to many other dinim. He doesn't give you an example here, unfortunately, but we can look it up in the original source. He's quoting a Mishnah Melch in Shkagos. I would give you the following example. Well, I don't think this is right, what I'm about to tell you. My question is, can we accept him as a witness qualified if he only worshipped Avodah Zarah on one occasion? All right, I don't want to bother you. You it's a Mishnah Melech in Chicago. I don't want to, maybe John, are you still with me? You have access to a Rambam, with the full, the full smorgasbord of all the Mefarshim, Hilchos Shgagos.
I have a Franco Rambam.
Excellent. If you can open up to Perek Gimel Hilchos Shgagos and look up the Mishnah Melech in Halacha Zayin.
Okay.
Because I want to see what case does he have in mind. He doesn't, in this very, skimpy or sketchy kind of introduction, he doesn't go into detail. What does he mean? Eino nechshav mumar bekach, meaning when he only violated Avodah Zarah Shabbos for Hesi once. Does that mean as far, it could be a law in marriage, or maybe he's talking about duchenin. Maybe he's talking about duchenin. Or is he talking about edus, whether we can trust his edus, whether he's trustworthy in kashrus? Can we count him for a million? I mean, 1,000,001 different possibilities cross my mind, but none of them seem to be correct. Maybe if we go back to the Mishnah Melech himself in the original, Perek Gimel Halacha Zayin Hilchos Shgagos. The trouble with the Mishnah Melech, I love the Mishnah Melech, but he is very long.
Yes. There are several pages here.
Pages. That's almost all the famous Mishnah Melechs that they always quote are pages and pages long, and they're only quoting like 1 or 2 lines until you find them. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. I'm just wondering out loud, is there a possibility? I just simply don't know. And here the Encyclopedia Talmudic wouldn't help me because it didn't get up to Mem yet, I don't think. So I want to look up Meshumah. Is there a possibility that a Meshumah is possibly Edus only if he is a, how would you say it in legal terms? When they a repeat violator? What's the phrase? Repeat offender? Is that the word? That you have to be a repeat offender in order to be a Meshumah for Psul Edus or for Psul Shchita. Actually, that wouldn't be so hard to look up because it would probably be in the first one in Shulchan Aruch Yoreh Deah. Do you want to look for that? Steve, you up to that? Maybe? I don't know. Take out a Yoreh Deah Chelik Aleph if you can. And if you don't know where to find it, David will help you find it if he's still there. And look up in Yoreh Deah Chelik Aleph. There should be a seif, if I remember correctly, about Meshumah, that we can't eat from his shchita. And I'm wondering if that's a repeat offender or even if he only violated Avodah Zarah once. Any luck, John?
I'll tell you what he says at the beginning. He says that this din is found in the Gemara in a few places. One is in the...
a Torah. Wow, that's really sophisticated. I was looking for a Shulchan Aruch. Be a Torah. I don't see if he says anything about Meshumah, but if David is still sitting here, I would leave out the Torah. Just 1 second, John. Can you help for a second if you can? Steve is looking for Meshumah. I think it's in Siman Aleph in Yoreh Deah. But he brought me the Torah is not what I need.
Interactive learning.
But
That's a hard to find.
yeah. No, let's just look at a regular, good old regular Sikarish Shulchan Aruch. We got a Torah, which is great, but I think Shulchan Aruch says about Meshuma. Yeah, John, I'm back with you. Sorry.
Okay, he says that this issue is raised in two Gemaras, many places. One is in Gimel of Horios, and another is in the first parak of Chulin, Daf Hey.
Does he say anything more substantial? Like, what conclusions is he deriving from those sugyas about Meshuma?
He's going to discuss it from this point on.
Can you pick out, like, even out of context, like one line where the word Meshuma appears? Like, if you could do a word search for Meshuma. See if you can find anything. Nothing about Meshuma?
I'll tell you what he says.
Here, so Kal Shabbos before. You know whether we trust the sheet or not. Right, I don't want to bother you. You have your work to do. See, the Encyclopedia Talmud didn't get up to Meshuma yet. Like, I can't cheat. What do you say, John? Anything else?
Nothing more. He does speak about Meshuma.
Oh, he does mention Meshuma?
Right at the beginning. He's been commenting on this Rambam.
Oh, what does the Rambam say?
Rambam says, "Kvar bi'arnu b'hilchos maseh hakorbanos she'hameshuma avodah zora or the chal Shabbos for Hesia ein mekablim menu korban klal."
Ein mekablim menu korban klal. So now the Mishnah Melch is going to ask, what qualifies as a Meshuma in this context, that we don't accept this korban?
Right.
And the question is, if you can happen to, skim with your eyes, obviously if it's pages, but somewhere there, you may see a line in which he discusses whether you need a repeated offender, or on one occasion that he worshipped Avodah Zarah, or he desecrated the Shabbos publicly, that already engenders the status of Mumar, of Meshuma. I'm just hoping that maybe you'll have to find it, in the rifruf, as we say, just like looking at from surface level and on. All right. So let's just postulate the following. Again, this is very, very iffy. I don't know that what I'm about to say is true, that there are Rishonim who would argue the position that only a repeated offender has the status of Meshuma. But if he only violated any of those two, on a single occasion, then we don't give him the status of a Meshuma. Somehow we assume that he's still within the fold. He slipped. I don't know, again, how you could slip and fall and go into a monastery and worship an idol, but... Siman base. Excellent. If you want to...
use the word movement, I'm sure.
Okay, maybe that's good enough. Yeah, you want to pass it on, maybe... Steve, see if you can get an idea whether we're talking about a repeated offender or not, as I said. Yeah. And he says that as far as Mumar in Karbanos is a special halach, even if he's not a Mumar, as far as other dinim are concerned, whatever those dinim are, shchita, let's say, because he's not a repeated offender, he would nevertheless be disqualified from Karbanos, and he'd be considered a Mumar. And this is based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Zebach v'shoyim toeva. He may not have the status of a Mumar, but he's definitely a Russian. Until he does tshuva, if he went into the monastery and he worshipped, Pa'ar or whatever it is, then he's a Russian. One-time violation makes you a Russian. And that's enough to apply the principle of Zebach v'shoyim toeva. We cannot accept the korban of a Russia his carbon is toeva. It's abomination, even though he's not a meshumah, and he doesn't have the status of a mumar. His shechita would be kshera, but we cannot accept his carbon. It's zevach rishayim toeva, and that is a fascinating insight here of the Mishnah Melech. Again, we have the Mishnah Melech on the table, we just don't know where to find it. It's so long. Okay. Any indication there? What makes a person a mumar? No? Okay. What happens even if he's a repeated offender of shatnez, of chazir, he doesn't eat kosher meat, and now he comes to bring a korban? Mekablu mimenu karbanos. It does not come under zevach rishayim toeva. Why not? He doesn't tell you. But if he's a repeated offender and it's very publicly known, this man eats in McDonald's, he is zevach rishayim toeva. And therefore, if he wants to bring a korban chatos, we cannot accept it. Now, wait a minute. Why is he bringing a chatos? Is he bringing a chatos because of an avera that he repeats constantly? Like, let's say, for example, he lives a very loose life in terms of morality, so he's constantly, I don't want to use those phrases that they use in public here, but he's living with women in sin, and now he comes to the Kohen and he says, "Bring me a chatos. Here's the goat, the seira, and let it be mechaper for all my immorality." That he can't do. We will not accept it. But if he brings a chatos because he ate chelev, or because he violated, pitamak Torres, some other chiyuv kores, he ate dam, he ate chelev, then we will accept the korban. We won't accept his korban chatos for that avera that he repeatedly and publicly commits. V'achronim istapku b'ofen sha'asa tshuva im yachol lahavi chatos l'kaparas hachet shechata b'zman sh'aya meshumad li'avera zu. Again, he quotes the same Mishnah Lamelech. And apparently the Mishnah Lamelech, the way he's being quoted here at least, is of the opinion that he can't bring a chatos for that avera that he was constantly, repeatedly violating, even if he does tshuva, we won't accept his chatos. Why? Because at the moment that he violated the avera, he was a meshumah. Now he's a bal tshuva. But a bal tshuva's carbon is fine, but not for the avera that he committed when he was a meshumah. The aver itself that he committed as a meshumah is mufka. It's completely excluded from a korban chatos. I'll be honest with you, it's counterintuitive, a radical chiddush. Nachri yachal lindar v'in lindov karbanos. We will accept karbanos, voluntary karbanos, from a nachri, from a non-Jew. The Gemara says, what about shlomim? Shlomim is very different, and it's very Jewish. The most Jewish of all categories of karbanos is a korban shlomim. If he wants to bring a korban olah, which is called an olas nedava, a voluntary korban olah, then we'll accept it from him. Because an olah is a korban that crosses international bounds, meaning racial bounds. You could be Jewish, you could be a Gentile, you could have a korban olah. Again, there's no chova, but I'm talking about an olas nedava. But shlomim, according to one opinion at least, is singularly dedicated to a Jew, and a guy is excluded from a korban shlomim. I don't know if you want to publicize this amongst your non-Jewish friends. You might incur some antagonism. And as you know, the Goyim look for every excuse to claim that the Jews are racists, because these are the nature of our enemies. And this will be another excuse. Oh, I wanted to bring a korban, happened to be a korban shalom, and they wouldn't accept it. They threw me out. Why? Because I'm a Gentile. Oh, look at these Jews. They're such racists. So I don't know. It's a little bit tricky. I don't want to publicize this halacha. I'll put it on a special, upload it on a special track, because the guy might get offended. They don't know. Shlomo is uniquely Jewish.
They would get no better.
Right, Ola is completely cold. And that concept could apply even to a god. But the concept of a shlom is uniquely Jewish, that you can have a korban and we're going to split it. Right. The Kohanim get half, or shall we say the Kohanim get a third. The Mizbeach, representing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, gets half. And then there's leftover for the Bailam. And the Bailam are not Kohen. And they can eat it anywhere in Yerushalayim. That has to do with Jewish philosophy. That's a uniquely Jewish concept.
Rabbi?
Yes?
I didn't hear Steve's question or Steve's comment.
Yes, Steve was mentioning that a korban olah cannot be accepted on a voluntary basis from a Gentile, whereas a korban shlomim, I'm sorry, what did I just say? I said an olah cannot be accepted? Cross that out, I'm sorry. It's the day after Tisha B'Av, so an olah can be accepted from a guy as what's called an olah snadava, a voluntary korban, but we will not accept from a guy a voluntary korban shlom. Only a Jew can bring a korban shlom. And Steve and I were discussing why there is such a distinction between an olah and a shlom with regard to a guy. Avel, during his 7 days of Avelus, he lost number one of his krovim, with 7 krovim. Eino mishalech korbanosim. He himself is stuck at home. He's sitting shiva. He cannot appoint a shliach to bring a korban at his behalf. In other words, an avel is excluded not just from the hakrava, but even from the korban itself. The korban cannot be ola lebailov in the case where the bailam is an avel. The nechleku rishonim and eno mishalech korbanos nedava, aval mishalechu korbanos cholva. This might be a fundamental distinction between an obligatory korban and a voluntary korban. If the avel wants to send a voluntary korban, we cannot accept it, even though he's sending a shliach who's going to bring it for him. But if he's a korban chova, we cannot penalize him and exclude him from fulfilling his obligations simply because he's an avel. So that's a machlokas rishon. The Sifri in Parshas Re'eh, on the pasuk Upanisa Baboker V'Halachto Li'olecha Kol Mishe V'Karban Ton Lina V'Oso Laila B'Yerushalayim. It says Upanisa Baboker. The next morning, you leave Yerushalayim, the environs of Yerushalayim, and you go back Li'olecha. But what does it mean the next morning? It means the morning after you brought your korban. So that means that the day of the korban, you have to sleep over in Yerushalayim. Otherwise, the pasuk is telling me something technical. Okay, he slept over in Yerushalayim, let him leave and go home the next morning. No, that's the Torah. That doesn't interest the Torah. The Torah is telling you Allah that after you bring a korban, you have to remain in Yerushalayim overnight, which is Lina. And only the next day you're allowed to leave the environs of Yerushalayim. Yom HaKrovas HaKorban or a Yontif L'Baila. This is a beautiful halacha. The day that you bring your korban is a Yontif for you. And by the way, this halacha applies even to a korban eitzim. Even if, let's say, I volunteer to bring eitzim lemizbeach, it's a yontif. There are 3 isurim that are engendered by the status of the day as a yontif. One is I can't do malacha. Number 2, there will be no hesped, and number 3, there will be no tainus, no fasting. So I understand tainus. I can't fast if today is a yontif. But what does it mean hesped? It's not a yontif for anybody else. I'm the only one on the face of the map. So what is a eulogy here? Who's eulogizing who, so to speak? So the pashtus here is that someone who is celebrating Yom Tov, it's very strange, it's modern. There's one person who is observing Yom Tov, no one else is. That person cannot come in to the Beit HaLevayot and recite and present a eulogy. By doing so, he is undermining his personal experience of Yom Tov. It wouldn't bother anyone in the audience. On the contrary, the fact that he came out of his celebrations in order to deliver a eulogy, that's great kavod mess. But it doesn't matter. He'd be violating his obligation to experience the day as a Yom Tov by simply any involvement with the dead, even if it means only a eulogy. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to stop for today. I'll just make a note of it. And we're almost finished with page 8.